In a crowded, bustling supermarket, the line snaked its way to the checkout counters. It was one of those days where everyone seemed to be in a rush, pushing and shuffling, each person trying to get ahead in the game of time. But one person had no idea that a seemingly small action would set off a chain of events that would lead to a life-changing moment, one that would forever alter the course of a stranger's day. Meet Karen. To the outside world, she was just another woman trying to get her groceries and move on with her life. But in a moment of frustration, Karen would let her emotions take over, setting the stage for an unforgettable encounter. When Karen saw a woman standing just a few feet ahead of her, she believed she had witnessed something no one could tolerate: cutting in line. It might seem trivial, but for Karen, it was the final straw in what was already a stressful day. Without thinking much about it, Karen pulled out her pepper spray. With a swift motion, she aimed it and released the toxic spray in the woman's face, demanding she get back in line. The sudden sting in the woman's eyes left her gasping for breath, blinking in disbelief at what had just occurred. "You can't just cut in line," Karen snapped, her voice dripping with anger. The woman, shocked and hurt, tried to recover, her mind racing as she processed the overwhelming aggression. But that's where the story takes a surprising turn. A few minutes later, in a surreal twist of fate, Karen found herself facing the woman once again. As the woman stood before her, something about her expression seemed so familiar, as if Karen had seen her before in another life. The confusion in Karen's eyes only deepened when the woman began to speak, her words steady but carrying an undeniable weight. "I hope you realize who you just sprayed," she said, her voice calm but piercing through the tension that hung in the air. Karen blinked. The reality began to set in, but it was too much for her to process all at once. Her heart raced as she searched her memory, the fog of her anger lifting just enough to make the connection. But when it clicked, everything froze in that moment. The woman standing before her wasn't just another customer in the store. She wasn't a random stranger. No, the woman Karen had just pepper sprayed was none other than a judge, an influential figure in the community whose face had appeared in newspapers and local news reports countless times. The shock hit Karen like a wave, and her legs felt weak. How had she not recognized her? How had she let her frustration blind her to the truth? As the weight of the situation started to sink in, Karen's stomach dropped. She had just pepper sprayed a judge, someone who had the power to change her life in an instant. What would happen next? Would this act of impulsive rage come back to haunt her? Or would she be able to walk away from this encounter without facing the consequences she so deeply feared? This was no longer just about a simple disagreement at a grocery store. This was about power, accountability, and how one fleeting moment could completely alter the trajectory of someone's life. But the tension didn't stop there. The judge, standing calmly but with authority, looked Karen in the eye. The clock was ticking, and the consequences were still unclear. Karen could feel her breath catch in her throat, the weight of her mistake pressing down on her shoulders. Would she apologize? Would the judge let her go with a warning? Or was this the beginning of something much larger, something that Karen had no idea was coming her way? In this world where a single decision can ripple through the fabric of our lives, we're left wondering, what happens when we cross paths with someone we least expect? And how will we handle the consequences when we realize our mistakes? The air in the store grew thick with an uncomfortable silence, and Karen felt herself shrinking beneath the weight of the woman's gaze. She could barely catch her breath as she tried to reconcile what had just happened. How could she have done something so reckless? She had let her frustration bubble over, assuming that the woman, who in her mind was just another person pushing her way ahead, was simply being rude. In a split second, Karen had let her emotions get the best of her. not even stopping to think that there was more to the situation. Her hands trembled as she looked at the woman, who was still standing there, unmoving, as if the incident hadn't fazed her in the least. That only made the feeling of guilt creep deeper into Karen's chest. She had lashed out without thinking, and now she had to face the consequences. Little did she know, the consequences of her actions were far more severe than she could have imagined. The judge had a calm but piercing presence, a quiet authority that radiated from her every move. But Karen didn't know the full extent of the woman's power. She didn't know that this was not just any ordinary judge, but someone who had made a name for herself in the courtroom. The kind of judge who had shaped policies, delivered groundbreaking rulings, and earned the respect and fear of those who had come across her path. A person who could wield the law with precision and fairness, but also one who understood the weight of a single decision. The judge's name was Monica Parker, and she had built her reputation on fairness and justice. But more importantly, she was known for her no-nonsense approach to life. People often said she was unshakable. In fact, she had been in this very store countless times, walking by with no one ever recognizing her outside of her formal position. She preferred it that way. It allowed her the anonymity she needed to feel normal in a world that constantly reminded her of the responsibility she carried. But now, as she stood facing the woman who had just pepper-sprayed her in cold blood, Monica was feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. A deep, unsettling sense of powerlessness. For a moment, she wondered if she should be angry, if she should lash out and make an example of Karen. But something inside her told her to hold back, to let the moment unfold naturally. "I think you owe me an apology," Monica said, her voice calm, though there was an undeniable edge to her words. Karen's heart skipped a beat. An apology? She had no idea how to begin, how to explain herself. She opened her mouth but couldn't find the words. The reality was sinking in. This wasn't just about cutting in line. This wasn't some minor incident she could brush off. She had attacked a judge, someone who was not only a public figure, but who had the power to change everything about Karen's life. "I'm so sorry," Karen stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what came over me." Monica studied her with a steady gaze. There was something almost unreadable about her expression. She wasn't angry, at least, not in the way Karen expected. Instead, Monica seemed almost curious, as though she was waiting to see what Karen would do next. As the seconds ticked by, Karen felt a rush of emotions: shame, embarrassment, fear. She wanted to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, but she also felt a burning need to explain herself, to make the judge understand why she had reacted the way she did. But then the thought crossed her mind. What if this wasn't going to be an ordinary interaction? What if this was about more than just a simple apology? Monica's eyes never left her, and Karen could sense that she was weighing something in her mind. The tension between them was suffocating, and Karen could almost hear the silent clock ticking in the background, counting down the moments that could alter the course of her life. "You know," Monica finally said, breaking the silence, "I've dealt with my fair share of cases, some of which involved people doing things out of impulse. It's a human thing, I guess. But you need to understand that actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences can be more severe than you think." Karen swallowed hard. She could feel her pulse racing in her ears. She couldn't help but think about how close she was to disaster. She wasn't just facing a judge, she was facing the potential of losing everything. What would the repercussions be for someone who had so blatantly disrespected a figure of authority like this? The thought of it made her stomach churn. "I didn't mean it," Karen pleaded, her voice shaky. "I was just frustrated, and I overreacted. I didn't realize who you were." Monica regarded her silently for a moment before slowly nodding, as though taking everything in. "I'm sure you didn't. But that's not the point. The point is, you need to learn that it's not just about what you meant. It's about what you did." Karen's mind raced, desperately trying to think of something, anything, to say that could make this right. The consequences of her actions were starting to weigh heavily on her, and she realized with a sinking feeling that this could be much worse than she ever expected. The last thing she wanted was to be remembered as the woman who assaulted a judge, but that's exactly how this moment would be recorded in the eyes of the law, the public, and anyone who heard the story. Monica stepped back slightly, her gaze still steady, but now carrying a sense of finality. "You have two choices now," she said, her voice calm but firm. "One, you can walk away from this, and I will choose not to press charges. Or two, you can face the full consequences of your actions. Your fate is in your hands." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air, and Karen was left paralyzed by the gravity of the decision she had to make. What would she do? Would she be able to walk away from this unscathed, or would she pay for her impulsive decision? The tension was unbearable, and Karen could feel the clock ticking toward the climax of this life-altering moment. What choice would she make, and how would it change the course of her future? Karen stood there, her heart hammering in her chest. The words hung in the air like an unspoken challenge. Monica, the judge, was giving her a chance that felt both like a lifeline and a heavy burden. In that moment, Karen realized she wasn't just facing a legal decision. She was facing herself and the kind of person she wanted to be moving forward. Did she want to own up to her actions, admit her mistake, and walk away from this with a second chance? Or did she want to let her pride get in the way and risk everything she had left? The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. Karen's mind was spinning, trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. She had acted out of frustration, yes, but in doing so, she had jeopardized everything she knew. The chance to walk away without severe consequences was right there, but would she take it? Monica's eyes remained fixed on her, waiting. There was a quiet understanding in the judge's gaze, an understanding that Karen was at a crossroads, one that would shape the next chapter of her life. This wasn't about the pepper spray anymore. This wasn't even about the incident in the store. It was about the choices we make when we're under pressure, when everything we know is put on the line. Finally, Karen took a deep breath. The words that came next surprised even her. I'll take responsibility for what I did. I was wrong, and I know that. I won't try to run from it." Monica's face softened just a fraction, the sternness in her eyes giving way to something more compassionate. She nodded slowly, as if she were weighing Karen's sincerity, and then said, "You're not the first person to make a mistake out of frustration. But it's how we handle those mistakes that defines us. This is your opportunity to learn and grow." Karen felt a weight lift off her chest as Monica's words sunk in. The tension that had been building for what seemed like an eternity began to fade. The future was uncertain, but Karen felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was a turning point. Maybe she could walk away from this, wiser, more aware of her own limitations, and more empathetic to others around her. Monica stepped back, as if she had made her decision. "I'm not pressing charges," she said. "But remember this. Your actions will always have consequences, whether you see them in the moment or not. I hope you choose to use this as a lesson to handle your frustrations differently next time." Karen nodded, her voice quiet but filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, and for the first time that day, she truly meant it. As Karen left the store, she felt a strange mix of relief and reflection. The world hadn't ended, but it had certainly changed. She would never forget this day, not just because of the shocking turn of events, but because it had forced her to look inward and confront something about herself that she hadn't fully understood before. Later, as the story of the woman who pepper sprayed a judge would make its rounds, Karen would find herself in the midst of conversations that weren't about her impulsive act, but about her ability to own up to it and take responsibility. In the end, it wasn't just the pepper spray that people would remember. It was her response to the mistake, and how she faced the consequences with humility and grace. This story was about more than one woman's frustration. It was about understanding that every action, no matter how small, has a ripple effect. It was about realizing that power doesn't always come from control. It often comes from owning up to our weaknesses and learning from them. And for Karen, the real transformation had just begun. This was just one chapter, but it was one that would shape the rest of her journey, a journey of personal growth and accountability.